So April 19th, 1775, the British retreated from North Bridge to an intersection, and the rebels, as you say, or the Americans, chased them. They both lined up one more time with an overwhelming force and fired. That's when the British decided that they're going to be heavily outnumbered. Now, they're going to lead a retreat back to Boston, and they have to make it in time because organized Minutemen under different commands are going to be pouncing upon them. They're all gathering and running towards Concord because the alarm went out and everybody was aware of it by 8 a.m., about 20 miles away. And then they were up and ready and on their way within that time. So the British knew that time was of the essence to get back to Boston. Same with the Minutemen. And that there was one point of the battle of Concord and this British retreat is the Bloody Angle, which is where we're at now. Well, I'm getting to there now. I'm walking on the battle trail of Lexington, Concord, of Minuteman National Park. And here I want to discuss what happened and the aftermath of this engagement. So with Bloody Angle, you might think of Spotsylvania Courthouse if you're a Civil War buff. But Bloody Angle is actually talks about the road here that the British took where it curves, and there was fire on both sides. Now the plaque here says some of the most intense fighting on April 19, 1775 happened in this area. This site later became known as Bloody Angle. Most of the 1700s Battle Road landscape was open farmland, but this stretch of road had woods and bends, which allowed the colonists to set up an ambush. Upon our ascending the height to the road, said British Lieutenant Sutherland, the colonists gave us a very heavy fire, but some shot from the left hand drew my attention that way when I saw a much larger body drawn up to my left. It says, we arrived just in time to meet the enemy. There was then, on the opposite side of the road, a young growth of wood well filled with Americans. The enemy was now completely between two fires, renewed and briskly kept up. They ordered out a flank guard on the left to dislodge the Americans from their post behind large trees, but they only became a better mark to be shot at. A short but sharp contest ensued, at which the enemy received more deadly injury than at any one place from Concord to Charlestown. 8 or more of their number were killed on the spot, and no doubt many wounded. That was by Reverend Edmund Foster, who was a Reading Minuteman. Crossing the fields from Merriam's Corner, colonial troops approached from the left with help from arriving companies from Woburn on the right. The colonists set up an ambush from both sides of the road and caught the British troops in the crossfire. Again, I have with me again American Spring by Walter R. Borneman. I'm going to read an excerpt from it about the Bloody Angle. Colonel Smith and Major Pitcairn urged their column forward through this dangerous terrain, but there was worse up ahead. The narrow road dipped into the valley of Tanner's Brook, and then began a strenuous climb up a higher hill on the other side. As it did so, the road made its first major swing to the north and entered a stand of timber. Not surprisingly, another ambush awaited. These men were from Woburn, 7 or 8 miles to the northeast. They had proceeded down the road in advance of the regulars, and when they came to the wooded knoll on the south side of the road, beyond the bridge at Tanner's Brook, their leader, Major Loamy Baldwin, recalled, "We then concluded to scatter and make use of the trees and walls to defend us, and attack them." Edmund Foster's Reading Militia Company was among those shadowing Smith's column, and seeing this same wood, it arrived on the north side of the road just as the regulars began to pass. The result, Foster reported, was that the enemy was now completely between two fires, and renewed and briskly kept up. The British force was likely Captain Lawrence Parsons' light infantry company from the 10th Regiment, and he ordered flankers into the trees to rout the Reading men, but according to Foster, they only became a better mark to be shot at. Now it was time to run. Exhausted though they were, the regulars advanced at the quick through what came to be called Bloody Curve, desperately trying to get ahead of the rebels outflanking them. The British officers were particularly hard hit. The rebels undoubtedly targeted them, but in part that was because they were so conspicuous, brandishing their swords and exhorting their men. On the rebel side, it was much more difficult to distinguish the officers from the rank and file, as they were mostly dressed alike and to a great extent hidden behind the trees, stone walls, and rock outcroppings. But once the front half of Colonel Smith's riddled column was out of Bloody Curve, the deep ravines and dense wood gave way to plowed fields and open pastures, near the spot where Major Mitchell and his patrol had captured Paul Revere in the wee hours of that same day. The hurried pace took a terrible toll in fatigue, particularly among the flankers moving over rough ground, but the alternative was to slow down and become easier targets. As it was, 21 companies marching in column by twos and makeshift ambulance chassis made for a procession almost half a mile long. Consequently, barely had the rear of Smith's column cleared Bloody Curve than his advance elements passed into a field of boulders, once again announcing more difficult terrain. Here the road curved south below a wooded ledge of some 40 feet high that bordered the road on the north. It ran along the road for about 100 yards and sloped upward to the north along a low hill. This spot was on the boundary line between Lincoln and Lexington. Now, later what would happen along this retreat is that John Parker, who we first met at Lexington, will finally get his revenge on the British. His group of militiamen and Minutemen are also going to have an ambush, and they're going to attack the British full force as best they can. John Parker's going to feel great about it. I mean, heck, I would. You know, he stood ground, stood firm, got shot at, retreated a bit, and then finally his men were able to regroup, collect themselves, and make way to be able to kick back at the British. You know, and once after reading the area, what took place here, you know, I could see here, you know, the sloping hills. I could see in the trees right over there, bloody angles where it aims down at, just over there, and the trees and whatnot. I can tell from the terrain. Even the terrain here slopes, and it goes upward. You know, this whole place here was bloody angle. All of this, and to read about it and then to be here, it's one of the most, for me, the cool feelings to experience. And it truly is remarkable how we were able to preserve a lot of this stuff, like we as an Americans, and everybody have had the forethought to preserve this. So what would happen after Parker's revenge is that there is a gentleman who reminds me of John Burns. I think his last name was Russell. And he was an old man, served in the 7 Years' War, I believe, set up a little defense for himself, rude makeshift defense for himself, waited for the British, fired upon him. He got shot in the head, lived, and became like a local hero too. It kind of reminds me of John Burns. And then there's another story about another house, might be the same house, that outside there was a whole bunch of carnage because the colonists retreated back into there as well because the British overwhelmed them. They retreated into the basement, and a British officer, a British soldier came to the top of the stairs, and they all fired upon him and killed him. But when you look outside and came outside, there were a whole bunch of dead colonists who were killed trying to get in because they were overwhelmed by the British. So the British eventually would be able to retreat back to Charlestown and then get back into the safety of Boston. And that's how they would close out their day in a humiliating defeat. The British, once known as the almighty soldiers, the great warriors, the grandest army, stuff like that, they had a reputation. Were humiliated by a bunch of ragtag Americans, as some would say, just whipping them all the way back to Boston. And to think about it, they got swarmed. Everybody, and I mean everybody that could, came and attacked the British and fought, because they knew that this was the boiling breaking point, and they were tired of it. And they were coordinated too. It's not like they were a ragtag team of just, oh yeah, we just see British people and we just shoot at them and, whip them up. No, this was all coordinated. There was only one road leading back to Lexington, leading back to Boston, and they chose that road, and they just waited. And the ones that could get there in time were able to get there. Some had to go further down the road and wait. It was ambush after ambush after ambush. And the British were just so tired and fatigued from retreating that it was either die or run. And they just kept running and retreating back to Boston in the safety of the city. And that is how we are able to conclude the Battle of Lexington and Concord, and the spark of the American Revolution. Now, I read the quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson of the centennial anniversary. It said something about a thunderbolt strikes about an inch of ground, but the light it emits can be seen throughout the sky. That's the first time I ever read it, and that was when I first visited here over at the North Bridge. Nothing more could have been said truer about that first shot heard around the world, because that really sparked something. And now we have this beautiful nation. So, I hope you liked this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next. Have a good one.